Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first faculty and staff diversity, equity, inclusion lunch and learn of the semester. And I'm quite excited, particularly with what is we're seeing in the news and everything that's going on in our classrooms, to welcome Jane and Tricia from our library and many other things that they do across campus and beyond. And they're going to tackle this important topic of book banning and censorship. And when they proposed this, I was so excited, and I'm excited to learn along with you all. So I'll stop talking and turn it over to them. Thank you.
Hello, I am Tricia Reinhart. My official title is Information Services Director, but that's just fancy for research librarian. I help students with research as well as do information literacy workshops within classrooms. And Jane, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Jane Peck. I recognize everybody on the screen, I'm pretty sure, so that's awesome. I'm the director of the library, and I've been working in libraries for a very long time. And I've worked in technical libraries, I've worked in public libraries, and now academic libraries. So I think I have a full view of what happens with censorship and dealing with all of those issues. But Tricia has done a fabulous job of getting all this information together for us, so I'll let her head into the presentation part.
Sure, thank you. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, and I'm going to leave it in this view rather than the presentation view so that it doesn't cut off anything. So it's a little awkward, but so today we are talking about book banning, diversity, and self-censorship. And you may be questioning what all those things have in common. They're sort of slightly related, but just trust in the process. It will all make sense in the end. I just wanted to preface this by saying that this is a topic that Jane and I both feel very passionate about. And a lot of the information that's presented would be considered one-sided. And we recognize that maybe not everyone in this Zoom call agrees with exactly our viewpoints, but we do welcome open discussion and want to hear what everyone has to say. So without further ado, so we're going to talk about sort of a basis of what is book banning, the definitions of it. We'll talk about some of the legislation that has been recently put into place as well as being introduced against diverse curriculum, the meaning of censorship and self-censorship, and we'll also have an anonymous Zoom poll at that point for you to answer before we get into the discussion portion. So I'm hoping that I can keep this to half an hour under so that we can have plenty of time to have a rich and open discussion about these issues and these topics. So so that, you hear about book banning, but there's actually a few different ways it can be referred to as. So when you hear of a book ban or a material ban, it's the actual removal of a material based on the objections of personal beliefs or values. You may also hear challenge, which is actually the most common version. Usually these are challenged in some way, questioned. So it's an attempt to remove or restrict those materials. And then you also see relocated. So it's sort of quietly being hidden or moved to a less noticed location so that it's not as accessible to the people that want to read those materials or look at those materials. And so here is just some statistics about the bans and challenges taking place. So these are put together every year by the American Library Association. And for Banned Books Week, which is usually in September, early October, it depends on the week. And I mean, as you can see, school libraries are the number one. I mean, that's what you hear about in the news, these school libraries that are being affected, having to pull all their books off the shelves and have them vetted. I know recently in Florida, I believe it was in Manatee County, all teachers are being asked to pull their books from their shelves, and the librarians in those schools are being forced to vet these based on a very specific criteria that in a specific list of books that are approved by administration. So I feel bad for those librarians being under that much pressure, but that's where we're mostly seeing these challenges or bans happening. And then as far as statistics now these statistics are technically from 2021, just as a precursor, but parents are initiating it the most, patrons in public libraries. But there's also those board administration members, and then the political religious groups that I think are dominating the news right now for challenging these materials. As far as what materials or why materials are being banned or challenged, here's a little infographic here based on the number of times or something has been and why they've been. The number one is sexually explicit. Now, as we get into the legislation piece of this, these terms of why they're being banned are kept vague. So sexually explicit may not mean what you think it means necessarily in the eyes of the people that are challenging them. But there's also LGBTQIA, critical race theory. That was a big one in 2020. But indoctrinating kids, profanity, wokeism, the woke culture that's being challenged or banned a lot. And so what do we mean when we say diverse content? Most of these items are being challenged or banned because they're considered diverse. And so there's a organization called We Need Diverse Books, and they have summed up this definition, I think, really well. So it says, we recognize all diverse experiences, including but not limited to LGBTQIA, people of color, gender diversity, people with disabilities, and ethnic, cultural, and religious minorities. And they have sort of specified what they mean by disability. So cognitive, intellectual, developmental, chronic conditions, mental illnesses, those sorts of things. And so this is the definition of the materials that are considered diverse and offensive to others that are being challenged today. And I mean, it's not just today. They've been challenged and banned for decades. This is just what we're seeing most recently now. And so Jane, would you like to?
Yes. So we wanted to sort of ground our discussion in the ALA Library Bill of Rights. This was first drawn up in 1939 and has been amended slightly over the years to include age as one of the parameters. And the Bill of Rights, I think Library Bill of Rights, people tend to think that it just applies to public libraries, but we feel that, and ALA feels that it applies to all libraries. And its main tenets are spelled out here, that books and other library resources should be provided for the information and enlightenment of all people of a community that the library serves. And the tenets of it are so succinct, I think, and really help librarians when we get to these arguments. And for years and years, no one ever, or very few people, especially in Massachusetts, brought books forward to be considered, to be censored or to be challenged. And almost always they were disallowed by the Board of Trustees or by the librarians. And so it's been really kind of shocking the last like 5 years to see these challenges coming up. And as we know, most of the discourse in public areas is full of very angry people, and they bring a lot of noise with them. And so we obviously keep a feel on the pulse of what's going on out there, but the Mass Board of Library Commissioners, which is the overarching commission that looks at and supports libraries, is now offering legal support. They're offering tactics for managing the number of challenges, what they look like. The ALA Bill of Rights also talks about exhibit spaces and meeting rooms and making those available. I think it's tenant number 6. And that gets challenged as well. It's not just the materials, it's the space in which they are located. And so we're getting a lot of support with a lot of education and a lot of legal support to defend the situations that librarians find themselves in now. So we'll talk about legislation next, because that's been fascinating to watch.
Fascinating is a relative term. So relating to all of these bans and challenges, I mean, as Jane mentioned, it's not just books. You know, we talk about book banning, but it's not just books. It's materials, and there have been several instances of legislation that has been introduced and actually passed in the United States recently. And so you can see the statistic there. Since the start of this year, that was that in 2022, lawmakers in 36 states have introduced a total of 137 educational gag order bills, an increase of 250% over 2021. That's a huge jump. And so some of the content that they are challenging has to do with these hot button issues. You know, if we go back up to that infographic of why items are being banned, they match up. Race and ethnicity, sexual identity and gender, LGBTQIA+ issues, also US history and contemporary American society. So that's like your critical race theory, anything that makes America look bad, basically anything that they deem anti-American or that poses America in a negative light. And as I mentioned, the bills introduced, they generally use vague language. So sexually explicit might not mean like a sex scene in a book. It might mean that it includes someone in the LGBTQ community, and someone finds that offensive and says, well, that's sexually explicit because it's not what I know and what I feel comfortable with. But you know, all this vague language makes it sort of puts a blanket statement on everything, and it makes it harder for educators to teach these materials, to know what to say, to know how to teach these important topics and events. But it also makes it easier for these lawmakers to punish them, to say, oh, well, you talked about this, you know, we said sexually explicit, so now you're being persecuted. You are being fined. You are being charged with a felony. Yes, you can be charged with a felony for some of these. And I just kind of note a little bit down here that this isn't, a lot of the times you hear about public school systems, elementary schools, high schools, but higher ed has not been excluded from this. There are legislation that is targeting higher education curriculum as well, and trying to say what can be taught and what cannot be taught. So what do
Also,
all of, oh,
I was
sorry,
just
go
going to
ahead.
jump in and
Oh.
say that for a long time, it was just targeting public schools and universities, but now it's targeting targeting private
Yes.
schools and universities and including those in some of those bills.
Yes, which is alarming. So what do all of these issues have in common? We have the challenging of books and materials and events too. We have the challenging of curriculum, and you can teach this, but you can't teach that. So what is this culture? Censorship. They're trying to censor what people have access to, what information can be given out, what information can be taught. So from the ALA Intellectual Freedom and Censorship site, the official definition is censorship is a suppression of ideas and information that certain persons, individuals, groups, or government officials find objectionable or dangerous. And so now this is where I get up on my soapbox. Essentially, it means this item offends me, and therefore no one should have access to it. Now I have this example here of Mouse. If you have never read Mouse, I highly recommend it. But it's often challenged. The reasons that it gets challenged, it outright, is that it has offensive language and it has an image of a naked person in it. But what is this series really about? And if you've never read it before, it's a graphic novel series. It came out in the 80s. It's written by the son of Holocaust survivors, and he is writing about their experience in the concentration camps. And he does it it's a graphic novel, so he does it in pictures and words. And he depicts the mouse, as the Jewish population, Jewish people who are being persecuted, and cats as the Nazis. So, really, we know what the real reason is here, why it's being challenged. It's because it's talking about the Holocaust, and that makes people uncomfortable. And it really isn't just about what they are, just sort of blanket, vague language, just so it's not really pinned down and defined. Now, an example I like to give is, so I have 2 kids. One is about to be 8 years old very soon. And would I give her Mouse to read right now? No, I wouldn't. Because I don't think it's appropriate for her age. I think her brain hasn't developed enough to really understand the imagery and the topics that they talk about right now. I don't have a problem talking about the Holocaust with her in an age-appropriate way, but no, I would not give her Mouse to read. Now, where the line is do I then have the right to turn around and say, well, this offends me, this is uncomfortable for me, now I'm going to take this away so nobody has access to it and nobody can read it, because we shouldn't be talking about this. It's so uncomfortable. So these censorship actions, they take, what it's really doing is taking it away from the people who really want and need to read these materials. And a lot of times it's minorities and other vulnerable populations that are represented in these stories, in these books, in these programs, everything that would not otherwise be represented elsewhere. And so when you take that material away from those populations, they're not seeing themselves being represented and they're not feeling validated. Now, it's not just books, it's not just graphic novels. It is, as Jane mentioned, spaces, and it's also events as well. So very recently, within the last month, we've had 3 libraries. We're on a listserv for all the libraries in Massachusetts, and we've seen some chatter on that listserv about an extremist group who's from New Hampshire, I believe, who has been coming down and protesting in 3 separate towns in Massachusetts, a drag story hour that they've been holding. And so those are pretty popular right now, and it's also pretty popular in the media about being challenged. And what these extremist groups do is they will call the libraries. They monitor these events on public calendars. They call the libraries, they harass the staff about it. They comment on Facebook when they see the Facebook event invite, and then they show up with signs and they're harassing people as they're trying to come in and enjoy these events. It's not affecting them. They are just offended by it and they don't like it. And so they want to ruin it for everybody else, like that one kid on the playground. So it's, not a lot of the cases that are being shown in the media are these sort of like extreme situations. We're not all Ron DeSantis standing up at the podium screaming about curriculum and books in libraries. In many cases, the challenges are by parents who are well-meaning. They're not necessarily trying to be malicious about it. They just think, oh, well, kids shouldn't be seeing this. It's gonna, they can't process this information, much like myself with my 8-year-old daughter, who I wouldn't give to her. But it's really rooted in this deep-seated feeling of being uncomfortable about these topics and not wanting to have these conversations. So what does this, what culture does this create? And so that's where the self-censorship comes in. So the literal definition from a dictionary is the act or action of refraining from expressing something such as a thought, point of view, or belief that others could deem objectionable. And there is actually a theory by Elizabeth Noel Newman called the spiral of silence. And it theorizes that if a person perceives their opinion is in the opposition, they are less likely to speak up. And so this, self-censorship is not black and white. It really isn't. We self-censor every day. There are different forms that it can take, and it's not necessarily based on fear. Now, my husband does not load the dishwasher correctly. That is my opinion, allegedly, in my opinion. But I'm not gonna, he's helping out, he's doing the dishes are getting done. I don't want to say anything. So I'm self-censoring. I'm self-censoring myself. And we do that every day. We do that every day to form,
Get along.
to get along. Exactly.
Yeah.
To get along. And to show, sensitivity and empathy. Sometimes we need to self-censor. what we're talking about here mostly is that the fear of being disciplined, persecuted, retaliated, and so it's a different level of self-censorship. Now, Audrey was kind enough to share with us some of the comments that they received on the climate survey. And I was very interested and a little surprised to find that there are at least a small group of conservative students on campus that do not feel like they are being heard. And, we are a liberal college. We have our values stand in social justice and, more liberal stances. But there was quite a bit of feedback that conservative students are feeling like they can't speak about their opinions. And so that kind of ties into this spiral of silence. So the majority is liberal. They feel like their opinion is the opposition. So they're not going to speak up. And so some of the reasons for self-censoring are fear of being judged by peers, students, or faculty. I mean, so you may have felt these yourself. Fear of retaliation, being reported to the dean, disciplinary board, posts on social media. I mean, with social media so prominent now, students, there's cyberbullying because of something somebody said. And I mean, I am a avoider of conflict by heart. I always have been. So this one speaks to me. Do not want to offend anyone or start a conflict or start a heated discussion. So, whether it's legitimate that someone might get reported or you might offend someone, or if they're just perceived, like you just kind of have this fear, they do feel real to the person in the moment. And we should be aware of that. So are a couple of reports on self-censorship and free speech on campuses. We got the regular hot button issues here, and generally students are feeling like they are uncomfortable talking publicly or disagreeing with the professor on a controversial issue or discussing uncomfortable issues on campus. So now is the anonymous poll time. So I'm going to launch this poll. We have a couple of questions here. So I'm interested in hearing how you feel about talking about uncomfortable issues on campus. And so I have it, in my class, this is geared towards faculty, but if you are a staff member, please replace this with in a meeting in my office. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll here. And please take a moment to answer these questions as honestly as you can. Are people seeing the poll? Okay, yes, okay. I see. For a minute there.
Tricia,
Yes.
this is Julia. I think too on the second question,
Mhm.
I tried to answer it, but there's a sort of more, I think, complicated or complex set of concerns in the classroom.
Mhm.
And I would say my concern's not really there. And my concern is that students misunderstand certain comments because they don't have the context, the historical context or the cultural context. Sometimes one doesn't know how far back to go to give the proper context for the comment. And so I've had comments grossly misinterpreted by students because they don't always hear that you're voicing someone else's, you're saying, in this text, the author says that such and such, or, and they don't always hear that's what I fear, that they don't always understand the context. And so we can easily be taken out of context.
And
Anyway.
I think, yeah, no, that's a really good
So
point.
I answered number 3, afraid of offending certain students, but not because what I'm saying is offensive.
Yes, no, I completely understand.
Yeah.
And I think that is a part of that sort of daily censoring that we do
Yeah.
as well. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily as like cut and dry as, oh, I'm offending someone.
Right.
It's sort of like in the context of the situation, maybe this isn't best and that's okay. So, but I completely understand. Yeah, offending is a strong word. Okay, so I'm seeing a raised hand here. We can I have one more slide that I just want to show really quick, and then we'll jump right into the discussion. So bear with me just a second. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here. I'm seeing these are some great answers. So some of the time, and then I'm afraid of offending certain students. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. I'll share the results. Feel free to move it aside while I talk. Now this is now granted, this is one study that I found, but it was this study was the only one that I could find at the time that has sort of concrete examples of what could work between faculty and students in the class. So I'll just leave this up here. Here, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And that poll. So you can just take a minute to read through these. I mean, it's sort of like this forming a community of we-ness, making students feel like they're part of the integral part of the classroom, as opposed to just the faculty sort of standing up there and being authoritative. Those are some of the themes here. But our discussion questions to sort of get this going, what can faculty or staff do to foster a learning environment where students feel safe or brave enough to voice opposing views? And what have others done in their classes, in their offices? And are there specific instances anyone wants to share? So Donna, I think you had your hand raised. Was that Donna Barry? Would you like to speak first?
Not really, but sorry, I'm dark because the sun just came out amazingly. I actually just had when it's going to comment on the first question in the poll about feeling uncomfortable, because I feel like we probably all, or maybe not all, I can't speak for everyone. There are sometimes I feel uncomfortable raising topics in class, but I do it, right? So I put none of the time because I still do it, but yeah, I feel uncomfortable. So I just wanted to make that sort of just a little comment on the question, because I understand completely what you're getting at, and the poll results are really interesting. I just wanted to make that comment about that first question.
Thank you. And yes, I think we all do that. It's just that you feel uncomfortable, but it's when you feel like you can't say anything at all is when that line, you kind of cross over that line. Yes, Lisa.
Just to build on that, I think we have to ask ourselves whether certain people or groups are more likely to feel uncomfortable, but be able to still feel that they can speak. versus people who feel uncomfortable and feel that they need to censor themselves because they may be more susceptible to being reported, or they may feel like a student is more likely to complain about them. Is a student more likely to complain about a Black faculty member than a white faculty member, or a woman versus a man? Or in the case of, if it's something about sexism or women, a man versus a woman. And are people going to feel, I think it is also very situational, whether you feel like it's personal. I think to Donna's point, I'm the same way. I may feel very uncomfortable, but I may still speak. But is that choice to speak or not also going to be determined by your group or your identity? So it was just what Donna made me think of.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think context and it's so interesting to me that I feel really like I've supported some students to be able to speak up, and I have some of the same students in different classes. And if it's a class that's 35 students, I see the same students who can really speak up in a different class, like with 10 students, and I just see them, quiet themselves. And also just sort of how I quiet myself. I could say something controversial if we're sitting in a circle and I can see everybody's faces. If I'm in front of 35 students, it's interesting. And I'm noticing that the trainings that we are getting is allowing me to do that a little bit more in the larger groups, and then pause and just let things sink in and say, and there are lots of different ways of responding here. So I think part of it is seeing each student as they are, and having a sense that they're known enough by you that there's protective factors there, that they're not just alone, the only student in this class who wants to raise a point.
I love the idea of preparing students and preparing class for a controversial discussion, so that I'm not, the whole idea of triggering and things like that, I thought was a little bit overdone, and people need to be a little bit braver maybe about things. But I do feel that's the way I was brought up. So you just suck it up, and you're not going to be shy. That was how I was brought up. But I think in the classroom, having a chance to alert students that you're going to be having these topics, or you want those things to come up, it can really help, and help students formulate some ideas about what that discussion would look like.
And that
But
was
I wonder
one.
go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. No, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I wonder what faculty feel about that. Does that work better that way?
And I'm gonna just, so we can have an open discussion, I'm just gonna stop the recording so we can share information. But the first part of this will be available to everyone and to our entire community. And we can also include more resources there too. So for those on the recording, thanks for joining us. Everyone else, stick around.